princess who grew up in Lebanon and is half Syrian. The Syrian conflict must also be a very personal thing for you, no? What's your take on the whole thing?
Definitely. It's a, you know, I can never distill myself from my origins of my mother's actually background, my family in Syria. I have a big family in Syria that is suffering right now, along with millions of other Syrians. I am here and my heart goes to all the Syrians, including my family, including the refugees I have seen on the borders of Jordan and of Lebanon. And my heart goes out to the governments who are responsible about such horrendous genocides. And I really mean genocides. I've been there, I've seen what is happening over there. Children are being slaughtered down the street when they're crossing the borders.
What do you mean under governments?
I mean all the governments of the world, whoever has a responsibility about this thing, about either the opposition or the government. Both of them are in the game themselves. And I think both of them, if they have listened to reason before hell broke loose, we wouldn't be seeing 10 million refugees on the borders. It's been a head-on game by both parties, the opposition and the government. And I think we should just sit down a little bit and think about who is benefiting from all this. I'm sure the Syrian people are not benefiting, because I've been there, I've talked to these refugees, I talk to my family on a daily basis. Definitely they're not happy from the situation, and they say on a daily basis that if I can go back to my country, I don't care what happens over there. I don't care who rules, as long as I go back to under my roof. This is the song that I've been hearing from mothers, from wives, from children over the borders, from the head of the tribes on the borders also of Syria and Jordan, and whoever is really transmitting the picture in the media from both sides, from the government or from the opposition, are not seeing what's happening down the street, or they choose not to see it, because it's really a tragedy. It's a human tragedy, more than you ever saw in Afghanistan and in Iraq. It's a mass genocide. That's what I call Syria right now.
For the West, it all comes down to Assad should go. What do you think? Should Assad go?
Well, it's a very hard question to ask on air. I'll tell you something. I'm not with Assad, and I'm not against him, and I'm not with the opposition, and I'm not against them. I'm with the people of Syria. Whatever the Syrians choose to have, should have. We should not be putting our heads and arms inside Syria. Syria should solve its problems on its own, like we should say to every country in the world. Everybody should choose their own country, their own government, their own solutions. Nobody should put his leg or hand inside other people's problems.
But unfortunately, it seems like in case of Syria, they really don't have much say in what happens to them. I mean, about Syrian people.
And that says a lot about both sides. It says a lot about the opposition, and it says a lot about the government. So I wouldn't be choosing either of them actually to be the spokesman of the Syrian people.
And what about Lebanon? When you talk, it's a global thing. What's going to happen in Lebanon? Because people always talk about Lebanon and how beautiful, multi-ethnic it was back in the 70s, and that's also under threat of extinction right now, especially with the Syrian case next door.
Lebanon has been the field for everybody since a long time, for the Palestinians, for the Israelis, for the Syrians. It's the field for every single war. Everybody fights his own battles on the land of Lebanon, the most beautiful country in the world was. And I grew up in Lebanon. I grew up in those beautiful mountains, and those in a society that didn't even know what religious sects are all about, rather than actually being Christian or being a Muslim or being whatever. They live peacefully besides themselves. And when the game started in Lebanon in 1975, and the army has engaged with the Palestinian refugees. It started as an argument and it ended in a civil war. So I think this doesn't happen actually just by accident. It just happens by a very, very articulated plan to take the war further ahead. And that's why the civil war actually stayed in Lebanon for 20 years. And don't ever think the war has ended in Lebanon. It's just a continuous war, but in a different phase and a different face.
How do you regard Saudi society right now? Because I remember you say that it is more backward, for lack of a better word, than it was in the 80s.
Every year that passes, I see things going back more and more backwards until the time of King Abdullah. I'm really impressed by King Abdullah until 2 years ago. His policies, his governance of the society of Saudi Arabia. He took the woman straight ahead. He put her on TV. He has turned his deaf ear into those voices of extremists who were calling to King Abdullah to favor the woman and imprison them behind their closed doors. He did not listen. He went along with his agenda that I thought was the core of Islam that people were not used to in Saudi Arabia. He was acting as the Bedouin man who really was taught Islam as its basic form rather than in a university that taught you extremism and how to treat people in a very extremist way.
If it were up to you,
yes,
what would be the first thing that you would change for women in Saudi Arabia? The very first thing.
Well, the very first thing is just establish a law called women's, recognizing women as a human being, having put her on that list of law of equal in law like the Quran and punishment and rights. This is the first thing I would call for. A rewriting of a constitution, or writing a constitution rather, because we have laws, we don't have a constitution.
You are a very outspoken person. How did the Saudi royals react to that? Aren't you afraid that you may be called back to Saudi Arabia and punished for what you're saying and for what you're fighting for?
I do not. If you go out of Russia and you say something, just as a truth, I'm not fighting Saudi Arabia, and I'm not fighting the law, and I'm not fighting the government, I'm not fighting the king, I'm not fighting anything. I'm calling for reform. That's what I'm calling for. I'm not calling for revolution. I respect my king. I respect my government. I'm for the government. I'm for the very wise men in Saudi Arabia. There is a lot of men and women in my family and in the government that know and exercise what I say. What I'm calling for is reform of the existing system. So there is no actually fear in my heart whatsoever of saying the truth and calling for the truth. And if you go back to Saudi Arabian government, there is a lot of misjudgment about our country. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of misjudgment about the people who come out in the media, because there is so many veiling to what's going on in our societies. Now everything is being unveiled. You can go on Twitter and see what people talk about. And I'm a tweeter, so you would really get to the core of the problem. I'm not afraid of that, because my family are not the monsters people are trying to draw. And I'm a proof of that. I've been writing in my country for 7 years on the same subject that I'm talking about right now. And the king was all for it, and he encouraged me to say my own mind. He was never actually against me. And he never was, and he's not right now. Otherwise, I would have been stopped a long time ago. I'm calling for reform in the executional level, not on the upper level, and everybody knows that.
All right, you're